Rihanna.
Yeah.
When you hear that name, it just it carries a lot of weight, doesn't it? Not just music, but like think about fashion, think about business. She's really built an undeniable global presence. And it kind of makes you wonder, with a platform that vast, what are the real possibilities? Like, where could it go?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, and it's actually the jumping off point for a lot of the material that we've been diving into. It brings us to the kingdom principles of the late Reverend Dr. Myles Munroe. His framework is really centered on this idea that leadership is at its core, about serving others, really about empowering communities and aligning your life's work with this kind of deeper sense of spiritual purpose.
Okay, kingdom principles. So the mission we're on today is to really look at how someone like Rihanna, who's already operating at this massive scale, could intentionally use these principles, kind of weave them into her already huge philanthropic and business endeavors.
Exactly. We're exploring how those vast resources could be, intentionally directed to create truly profound and lasting legacies. It's a really interesting thought experiment.
It is. And I think it could apply to a lot of people. I mean, even if we're not at Rihanna's level, the core ideas could be really relevant.
Absolutely. And that's part of what makes these principles so compelling. They're applicable at different scales. So to get us started, we've got excerpts outlining these kingdom principles alongside a look at Rihanna's, incredible career trajectory, her accomplishments, her existing philanthropic work. We even brought in some context on the current realities for Black America, all to see where the application of these principles might be most impactful, I guess you could say.
It's a good mix of sources. I'm curious to see how it all connects. So let's start by defining these kingdom principles a little more. I mean, when we say kingdom principles, what exactly are we talking about? Is it just a general idea of doing good, or is there something more specific to it?
It's more than just, a vague notion of doing good. As Dr. Munroe laid them out, these principles are meant to be practical, almost like operational guidelines for how individuals and societies can function. They're grounded in scripture, but they're designed for actual, tangible, application in the real world. So they're not just theoretical or aspirational, they're meant to be put into practice.
All right, so give us some of the core tenets. What are the real foundational ideas?
Well, one of the fundamental principles is this belief that every single person, every individual has a divine purpose, that we all have this inherent potential that's often untapped. And when people connect with that sense of purpose, really connect with it, it fuels more impactful and meaningful lives. Now, for someone like Rihanna, who has already achieved so much success, a deeper alignment with her core values, aligning her endeavors with those, could really amplify her positive influence, like exponentially.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, it's like when your passion and your actions are really in sync, the impact is just so much greater.
Exactly. It's about that synergy, that alignment of who you are with what you do. Okay, so another crucial principle is what Dr. Munroe called servant leadership. And this isn't about power over people. It's about leadership that prioritizes the needs of others, the community as a whole. It's leading by example with integrity and genuine care. So thinking about Rihanna, a good question to ask is, where does she already embody this? And are there areas where she could, maybe deepen this approach in her various ventures?
I mean, off the top of my head, the inclusivity she's pushed for with her brands, it feels like she saw a real need and used her platform to try and change things.
Right, like with Fenty Beauty, that huge range of foundation shades, addressing the needs of, all skin tones. That wasn't just a business decision. It was about serving a demographic that was largely ignored. It shifted the entire beauty industry standards on diversity and inclusion. So, yeah, you could argue that was a very real example of servant leadership in action.
Okay, and then there's this principle of stewardship. And this one's about managing resources responsibly and ethically. Of course, we're talking finances, but it also includes influence, power, intellectual property. It's about being mindful of the impact you're having. So how might this apply to Rihanna's business operations and even her responsibility towards her huge global audience?
It makes you think about all those things, like sustainable sourcing, fair labor practices, just generally making sure the business is ethical, especially with a company that large. Exactly. And all of those things are increasingly important to consumers as well. It's not just about the product anymore, it's about the values behind it. And then there's the principle of righteousness, or you could call it living justly, ethically. This could be a guide for her advocacy, especially in areas around justice and equality, where she's already been pretty vocal.
It's about choosing to support causes that are genuinely about the greater good, right? Not just trendy or for show.
Exactly. It's about aligning your actions with your values in a very real way. All right, and then we have this concept of sowing and reaping. Basically, the idea that the effort you put in, the resources you invest, will eventually yield returns. Think about it in terms of philanthropy. It emphasizes the long-term impact, the importance of investing in sustainable solutions, not just quick fixes.
It's not just about putting a Band-Aid on a problem. It's about actually trying to solve it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a more strategic, thoughtful approach. And then there's this idea of community and fellowship, understanding that we can achieve more together through collaboration and mutual support. Now, Rihanna has this massive global network. Think about the potential for strategic partnerships, for amplifying the impact of her initiatives.
It's like instead of trying to do everything herself, she could partner with organizations that are already doing great work and amplify their efforts.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that we don't have to do everything alone, and that collaboration can be incredibly powerful. Now, while we're focusing a lot on these practical applications, the Kingdom principles also acknowledge faith and seeking spiritual wisdom in decision-making.
Which makes sense, right? Like having that kind of moral compass could be so helpful, especially when you're dealing with complex issues.
Exactly. It's about grounding your actions in something bigger than yourself. And then there's integrity. I mean, that's crucial for anyone, but especially for someone with Rihanna's level of influence. People need to believe in the authenticity of her actions. It's about consistency between your words and your deeds.
Because without that, people see right through it.
Yeah.
Any hypocrisy just undermines everything else.
Absolutely. Trust is so hard to build and so easy to lose. And finally, we have this concept of transformation. The idea that real change often starts with individual growth and then ripples outward to impact the world. And Rihanna's own journey, from a young artist to this global icon, that itself can be a powerful source of inspiration for others.
It's like a living example of what's possible, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good understanding of the framework now, these Kingdom principles. Let's shift gears a little and talk about Rihanna's journey and the impact she's already made.
Yeah, let's dive into that. So her rise in the music industry, it's pretty legendary at this point. From her beginnings in Barbados to signing with Def Jam, and then that massive global breakthrough with Good Girl Gone Bad, the early Grammy wins, it all kind of solidified her place as a musical powerhouse.
Yeah.
And, that created a platform we're talking about, the one with this immense reach.
And then she took that platform and really expanded beyond music into the world of business.
Yeah.
And she did it in a really smart way.
Absolutely. Her role as creative director at Puma was notable, but the launch of Fenty Beauty, that was a real game changer. That, incredible range of foundation shades. It finally addressed the needs of people with all different skin tones. And it wasn't just about selling makeup, it forced the entire beauty industry to really confront its lack of inclusivity.
It really did. Other brands had to scramble to catch up, to broaden their offerings.
Yeah.
And then with Savage X Fenty in the lingerie market, she kind of did the same thing. Really emphasizing body positivity and inclusivity, challenging those, very narrow norms that had existed in that industry for so long.
Yeah, it was a very similar playbook and a very effective one. Both of these ventures show her, business savvy for sure, but also this genuine commitment to representation and inclusivity. But it's through her philanthropic work, specifically with the Clara Lionel Foundation, named after her grandparents, that we see her really leverage her success to help others.
Right. And CLF, they focus mainly on global education initiatives and emergency response, correct?
That's right. They've provided a ton of scholarships for students in the Caribbean, supported education programs in, developing regions around the world, and they've also made a real impact on healthcare. That big donation to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Barbados, that led to the creation of the Clara Braithwaite Center for Oncology and Nuclear Medicine, that provided crucial cancer treatment facilities in her home country.
Wow, that's a really concrete and impactful contribution.
Yeah.
And I think it shows a real commitment to giving back to where she came from.
Yeah, for sure. And the foundation has also been incredibly active in responding to emergencies like Hurricane Harvey. They've donated a lot of money and resources to help with relief efforts. And their reach extends even further. They support global initiatives like the Global Partnership for Education and the Global Citizen Project.
I remember during the peak of COVID, she and the foundation were very quick to act and offer support.
Absolutely. CLF made huge donations to support frontline healthcare workers and vaccine development. And her commitment to social justice is also really clear. She supported organizations like the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, the ACLU, and she's been a very vocal advocate for the Black Lives Matter movement.
So it's clear that she's using her wealth and her influence to make a difference in a lot of important areas.
Oh, for sure. And we can't forget her broader cultural influence through movies and TV. That just amplifies her reach and her impact even more.
All right, so we've got this incredible platform in motion. Now let's talk about the context, the current state of Black America. What are some of the biggest challenges that we're still facing?
Well, while there's definitely been progress, unfortunately, there are still significant disparities socially, economically, and in terms of healthcare that disproportionately impact Black communities here in the U.S. For example, in education, we see this persistent achievement gap, and access to quality educational resources is often very unequal. The underfunding of schools in predominantly Black neighborhoods is a huge issue.
Yeah, it's like that lack of opportunity early on just create a ripple effect that can last for generations.
It really does. And then in healthcare, Black individuals experience higher rates of chronic diseases and face more barriers to accessing quality care. And there's also this historical context of mistrust towards the healthcare system within some Black communities, which is completely understandable given, the history.
Yeah, that history of mistreatment creates a lot of understandable barriers.
It does. And then economically, the wealth gap between Black and white households is still really stark. Things like discriminatory lending practices, unequal job opportunities, and persistent wage disparities, they all contribute to this. I mean, studies consistently show that Black families hold a fraction of the wealth of white families. It's a huge problem.
It's such a deep-rooted problem, and the consequences are so far-reaching.
They are. And then these disparities extend to housing as well. Black individuals and families are more likely to experience housing insecurity, often live in worse conditions, and still face discrimination. And redlining, that practice of denying services to residents in certain neighborhoods based on race, that has had a lasting negative impact on community development and wealth building. And then the criminal justice system, the racial disparities there are just staggering. The rates of stops, arrests, incarceration, it's all deeply troubling.
The impact on families and communities is just devastating.
It is, and we also have to acknowledge environmental racism, where Black communities are more likely to be located near polluting industries and hazardous waste sites, which has, serious health consequences.
Just this complex web of interconnected challenges.
Absolutely, and while we're highlighting these issues, it's also incredibly important to acknowledge the resilience, the strength, and the advocacy that's happening within Black communities. There are so many people and organizations working to create positive change.
For sure. There's a lot of incredible work being done at the grassroots level. So this brings us to a crucial point. How could Rihanna, by applying these kingdom principles, specifically contribute to empowering Black communities in the face of all these challenges?
This is where it gets really interesting. Let's say she fully embraces that idea of leadership as service in the realm of education. She could, expand her scholarship programs, but also create these really robust mentorship initiatives, connect students with professionals in their fields. It's about helping them bridge that gap between education and, actually finding meaningful work.
Yeah, it's not just about financial support, it's about guidance and connections.
Exactly. It's about a more holistic approach. And in healthcare, instead of just focusing on treatment, she could really invest in community wellness centers. These centers could offer preventive care, mental health support, nutritional counseling, fitness programs. It's about a more proactive, holistic view of health.
It's about addressing the root causes of health issues and promoting well-being, not just reacting to illness.
Right. And when it comes to economic empowerment, specifically the principle of righteousness, she could really scale up programs that support Black entrepreneurs. Things like grants, low-interest loans, business incubation programs. These can all help create sustainable businesses and wealth within these communities.
It's about fostering economic independence and long-term stability.
Exactly. And thinking about community and fellowship, she could support affordable housing projects that are designed to be more than just apartments. Imagine integrated communities that have job training facilities, educational resources, and are built with sustainability in mind.
So it's like creating these self-sufficient, thriving neighborhoods that address a lot of needs at once.
Exactly. And nurturing potential through cultural investment, that's another avenue. Imagine her funding arts education programs, platforms specifically for Black artists. This could preserve cultural heritage, foster a sense of identity, and provide opportunities for creative expression.
It's about giving a voice and a platform to that incredible talent.
It is. And for justice and equity, she could create or support centers that offer free or low-cost legal and financial literacy services. That knowledge can be so empowering for people, especially when they're navigating complex systems.
It's about giving people the tools to advocate for themselves.
And in line with environmental stewardship, she could really champion environmental justice initiatives, cleaning up polluted sites, promoting environmental education, and advocating for fair environmental policies.
Because those environmental issues have a very real impact on people's lives.
They do. And for integrity and transparency, she could really set a new standard for celebrity philanthropy. By regularly reporting on the progress, the challenges, the outcomes of her initiatives, she could build even more trust and credibility.
It's about being accountable to the communities you're serving.
Exactly. And finally, for collaborative transformation, she could partner with organizations that are already deeply rooted in these kingdom principles, organizations that have been doing this work effectively for a long time.
It's about strategically aligning her resources with her values to create real and lasting change.
Exactly. And that brings us to some specific opportunities where her involvement could be really transformative.
It's about focusing those resources where they can have the biggest impact, right?
Yeah, like in education reform, scholarships are great, but add in internships, mentorships, real world experience. And she could even use her platform to advocate for policy changes, push for more equitable funding for schools, things like that.
It's about going beyond individual support to try and change the system itself.
Right. And in healthcare, she could really invest in those community health centers, not just for treating illness, but for preventative care, addressing those chronic conditions that disproportionately affect Black populations, and a huge focus on mental health as well.
A much more holistic and forward-thinking approach.
Absolutely. And for economic empowerment, supporting entrepreneurship is key, but focusing on high-growth sectors like tech, green energy, that could be really impactful. And then pair that with financial literacy programs and support for community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, that specifically serve these communities.
It's about preparing people for the future, right?
Exactly. And bridging the digital divide, that's crucial. Providing access to computers, the internet, and also digital literacy training, because those skills are so essential now.
It's about making sure everyone has the tools to participate in the modern economy.
And supporting legal aid clinics, justice reform initiatives, that can help address those systemic inequities within the legal system.
It's about providing legal support and advocating for fairness.
And investing in cultural programs that celebrate and preserve Black culture, that's so important. It enriches communities, fosters pride and identity, and helps keep those traditions alive.
It's about recognizing the value and the power of culture.
And addressing housing insecurity, supporting affordable housing developments, homeownership workshops, access to legal advice for those facing housing discrimination, that's another key area.
Providing stable and secure housing is fundamental to everything else.
It is. And then championing those environmental justice initiatives we talked about, cleaning up pollution, promoting environmental education, advocating for fair policies. That's so important for the health and well-being of these communities.
It's about making sure everyone has a clean and healthy environment to live in.
And then, there's the political realm. Supporting voter registration drives, engaging with candidates who are aligned with those values of equity and justice, that can be a powerful way to create change at a systemic level.
It's about empowering people to participate in the political process and make their voices heard.
Exactly. And then expanding her work to include the Black diaspora globally, recognizing that a lot of these challenges are shared by Black communities around the world.
It's about building connections and solidarity across borders.
Exactly. So by focusing her efforts in these key areas and always grounding her actions in those kingdom principles, Rihanna has the potential to make a truly lasting impact.
It's an inspiring idea, really. It makes you think about what's possible when someone with that level of influence chooses to use it for good.
It does. And the source material talks about this spiritual call to action. And it's not just for Rihanna, it's really for all of us, to think about our own sphere of influence and how we can make a difference.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in thinking, well, I'm not Rihanna, I don't have that kind of platform. But the truth is, we all have some level of influence, right?
Absolutely. And it starts with, like we were saying, visionary leadership. It's about defining a purpose-driven vision for your life, your work, that's bigger than just yourself. It's about compassion. It's about justice. And then it's about integrity, living your values, making ethical decisions in every aspect of your life.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. And service to others, that's key. How can you use your skills, your resources to empower those around you? And then fostering dialogue, understanding, talking about these issues, values, creating spaces for open and honest conversations, and building community, whether it's through formal organizations or just, informal networks, creating those spaces for mutual support and growth.
Those connections are so vital, I think.
Absolutely. And then being mindful of sustainability in your own life, in your work, making choices that are responsible and considering the impact on future generations. And cultivating your own inner life through reflection, learning, seeking guidance. That's what helps you lead with purpose and integrity.
It's about having that internal compass.
And then using whatever platform you have, no matter how big or small, to advocate for what's right, to speak out against injustice, and practicing responsible stewardship of your own resources, your time, your talent, your money. It's about being intentional with how you use those things.
And thinking about your legacy. How do you want to be remembered? What kind of impact do you want to leave on the world?
And I think to wrap it up, when someone with Rihanna's platform intentionally aligns her actions with these principles, the potential for positive change is just enormous. It's really inspiring to think about.
It is. And it kind of challenges the traditional idea of celebrity,
Right.
It shows that fame and influence can be used to make a real difference in the world.
For sure. And it's not just about throwing money at problems. It's about engaging with them thoughtfully, strategically, and with a genuine commitment to making things better.
And it raises the bar for everyone, right? If Rihanna can do it, why not the rest of us?
Exactly. It's a call to action for all of us to think about our own potential and to step up and make a difference in whatever way we can. So, we'll leave you with this. What is your kingdom? What is your sphere of influence? What are your resources? What are your values? How can you apply these principles of service, stewardship, and purpose to create positive change in your own little corner of the world? What's one small but meaningful action that you can take today?
That's a great question for everyone to ponder. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the potential for positive change. Thanks for listening.